Welcome to Sounding Board, a podcast from the Presbyterian Association of Musicians.
Faith expressed, music explored, stories shared. This is a podcast that we hope will inspire and equip worshiping communities through meaningful conversations at the intersection of music, faith, and liturgy. Today we had Dr. Maren Haynes Marchesini, 3 names that we're pronouncing correctly, and we want to make sure other people pronounce correctly.
What a great guest.
She
Oh
was
my gosh.
just so cool. She's really, I think our listeners are really going to enjoy hearing about her. She is a scholar. She's a musician, a choral musician, a conductor, a cellist, an indie folk musician, an indie, I guess, rocker. She's an ethnomusicologist. She was just amazing.
Yeah.
And there were so
We
many
need to have like 7 more podcast episodes with her. We could have just delved into so many different topics.
We pushed and pulled her, I think, into so many different directions in this podcast, but they were all things that I found, each one of them were just so interesting
Yeah.
that I wanted to know more about each thing. So
Yeah. I'd love to visit her church someday. I want to
Yeah.
experience worship at her
yeah,
church.
absolutely.
We'll take a road trip.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'll meet you in Kansas
Bozeman,
or
Montana. Oh,
somewhere, some halfway
can-
point
you can
between
drive to
North
me in
Carolina.
Nebraska. and
Oh,
we'll get to
okay,
you.
okay, gotcha. That sounds like a lot
That'd
of
be great.
driving for me. Or I guess planes exist too. We could maybe just fly there. Listeners, you're gonna love hearing from Maren today. She is just a wealth of information. She has so many lived experiences, both in Montana where she lives, but she also lived in Seattle and sort of lived through the grunge scene and has a lot to say about that, but also traveled abroad and has all these experiences in, I think she said, Kazakhstan and
Yeah,
Mexico and Guatemala, all sorts of things. She has quite the lived experience.
Totally.
It's interesting to see how when you travel abroad that way, it really informs your picture of who God is and who the church is, capital C church, like the Catholic and Apostolic Church. That's
Right.
not just
By
our
remembering-
congregation.
Yeah, by remembering how big the world is, we can also remember how large God is.
Amazing.
Yeah, God doesn't fit just or belong to just our worshiping community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Couldn't have
Yeah.
said it better. Hey Jeremy, what are you wearing there?
Today I'm sporting a jacket from my current congregation, First Plymouth, to our music
A little
program.
tiny church called First Plymouth
Yeah, little place.
in little Lincoln, Nebraska.
That's right.
It's a wonderful place I got to visit recently.
That was
which
great
is
having you there with us.
Great, and play that organ, which is just a dream. What a gorgeous space.
It's a special instrument, special place for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, today I am representing Community Presbyterian Church, which is in Pinehurst, North Carolina. Kirsten Foyles, I have a special connection to that church, even though I've never lived in Pinehurst, but our friend Kirsten Foyles is the music director there.
Hey, Kirsten.
Hey, Kirsten. And before Kirsten, the director, she's now retired, was Dr. Terry Sinclair, and Dr. Sinclair was my choral director in college. She's really the person that introduced me to choral music in a way that I was a piano major and I didn't really know that I could sing or that I enjoyed singing or that I would even like choir. And Dr. Sinclair really pulled me into choir and helped uncover this now lifelong infatuation and love with choral music.
What a gift.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that she pulled you in that direction.
Yes, me too. I'd say probably the majority of the most meaningful friendships and connections I've made in my life has come from choral singing and moving to a new city. I wasn't worried that I wouldn't meet friends because I said, I already know where my friends are. They're in the choir.
They're in the choir. I love that.
Yeah,
Nice.
so I'm very grateful. And we want to give a shout out to Community Presbyterian Church in Pinehurst, North Carolina. And if you would like your church featured you can comment on our YouTube channel or social media, and someone will get in touch with you about how we can represent your church and give your church a little shout out. And yeah, get uh, more people involved. The more, the better. This is a big world, and we hope that our listeners will come from all sorts of places,
Yeah.
not just North Carolina, where I live, or Nebraska, where you live.
We definitely need more listeners than Nebraska can give us, like that, you know.
Yeah, not the most populated state, I would
When we
guess.
moved there, I think somebody told us that if you removed Lincoln and Omaha,
Yeah,
which are the big cities, if you
yeah.
took them out, somebody told us that the population of the rest of the state, cows outnumber people. So,
Okay, and cows
yeah,
don't typically subscribe
listen
to
to podcasts. Yeah.
podcasts.
So, subscribe to our podcast
Yes,
if you're
please,
not
please,
from
please.
Nebraska
Yeah.
and if you're from Nebraska.
Well, please enjoy today's episode with Dr. Maren Haynes Marchesini. I think that you're really going to enjoy it as we did.
Want to stay connected to Pam between conferences and events?
Follow the Presbyterian Association of Musicians on social media for inspiration, updates, and resources.
Find us on Facebook at Presbyterian Association of Musicians.
On Instagram, it's at Presby Music, and on TikTok, at Presby Music 1970.
Follow along and join the conversation wherever you scroll.
Welcome to Sounding Board. Today we are joined by Dr. Maren Haynes Marchesini. Dr. Haynes Marchesini is a choral director, cellist, vocalist, composer, and scholar with interests in congregational music, ritual, community formation, and collaborative creativity. She holds a PhD in ethnomusicology, where her doctoral work focused on megachurches, power and identity, issues she continues to explore in her scholarship. She lives in Bozeman, Montana, and serves as director of worship and music at Hope Lutheran Church, as well as program director for Hope Lutheran's Center for the Arts. She also performs with Roots in the Sky, chamber choir, opus treble ensemble, hemispheres instrumental duo, and with a sacred indie folk trio. Maren, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great. So, Maren, we like to know a little bit about our guests' upbringing and relationship to religion and the church, what that looked like in your growing up years, and um, kind of, yeah, what has brought you to where you are today. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Absolutely. I was raised in the PCUSA, the Presbyterian Church, and I'm one of several generations of Presbyterian women in my family. My grandma and my great grandma were both church music people, but in a very small church in Hysham, Montana, which is in rural eastern Montana. I grew up going to church, just sort of being a part of youth group and things like that, and then went to a Presbyterian college, Whitworth in Spokane, and got a music degree, then went and did young adult volunteer corps with the Presbyterian Church for a year.
Nice.
And that sort of set a trajectory of being interested in ministry, but wanting to do some other kinds of things in terms of my kind of academic, scholarly, and musical background. And so I went to graduate school kind of not knowing exactly what I would pursue, but ended up with a job in a Lutheran church while I pursued my PhD in ethnomusicology. Then got interested in church music as a part of ethnomusicology because a lot of the issues in community music and formation just seems to be kind of showing up in church music as well as, all kinds of traditions from around the world. And so I ended up studying a megachurch in Seattle for my dissertation project while also working in a very different church as a church music director. Um, and so that sort of set the trajectory of being in church music for the long haul. I wasn't necessarily expecting to do that going into my doctorate, but coming out, it seemed like a good fit for my skill set. So I've been doing that for, I don't know, 15 years now, and am at a church in Montana now where I lead choir, worship band, and do a lot of other kind of interesting things around the arts and religion.
That's amazing. One of the things I love about you, I haven't obviously gotten to know you. This is the first time that we're meeting, but as I've researched you and learned about you, you have such a varied interest in music. You're a choral musician and indie rocker and ethnomusicologist, and I'm curious, how does someone in the PCUSA church in Montana find themselves in ethnomusicology? What drew you to getting a degree in that?
Yeah, it was something that probably seemed like exotic and interesting when I was younger. But I think as I entered graduate school, I actually started in a choral music program.
Uh,
And I had come off of a few pretty intense years. My family had adopted two children from Kazakhstan, so we'd spent time in Kazakhstan in the orphanages there, and then, being a part of a expanded family with two young people who had, grown up in a really tough situation and didn't speak English. And then after that, working on the US-Mexico border for a year with undocumented people. And then I traveled quite a lot the year after that, so getting to know more about sort of the migration situation in Mexico and also Guatemala and some of the circumstances faced there by people who were in economically, like, impossible situations.
yeah.
And then spent a bit of time in Israel, Palestine. And so when I landed in grad school in choral conducting, my feelings about just doing something where people, I kept using the phrase, they're gluttons for beauty, sort of this relentless pursuit of a beauty that didn't seem to be really for anything. And it was really competitive, and people were kind of awful to each other. And I just, couldn't help but think, this is not why I'm here. And so after a bit of time, I kind of had an existential crisis and decided to reevaluate what I was doing. And it seemed pretty obvious as I started to take classes in some other areas that ethnomusicology was really a good fit for exploring issues of music and meaning, music and justice, and then also getting to know the brilliance and capacity and value systems of people from other places. And so that was what sort of turned my head toward ethnomusicology, and I just absolutely loved that degree program.
Wow.
That's such a beautiful answer, and it makes me think of this is not a podcast about me, but I spent some time in Guatemala just after I graduated college, and also sort of had this existential crisis of like, what am I even doing? What is music even for in the grand scheme of things? There are people that are in such desperate poverty, and here I am just, playing Chopin, etudes and practicing my scales in the grand scheme of the world. How does this even fit in? And so I'm sure that your experiences abroad and your experiences with ethnomusicology has really informed your ministry life and informed how you think about ministering to people, maybe I'm assuming maybe a homogenous group in Montana, and maybe thinking about and expanding, people's views that of who God is and who God is for.
Mm.
And I'm curious how, there's of all of your interest, I don't know if this is a question so much as a statement, or if you have anything to add, that the intersections of those things must come together in such interesting ways, the way they inform one another.
Absolutely. It's almost something I haven't had a chance to talk
Mm,
publicly about or in scholarship as much as I would like, but I think witnessing artist activism from people like Melanie Demore and the kind of work that Bobby McFerrin and
yeah.
his Voicestra and the Cultural Heritage Choir of Linda Tillery and um, the artivistas who are part of the fandango movements and things like that really gave me some entree into not only brilliant people but elders and scholars who were interested in how you bring together community formation, a deep sense of spirituality and identity, with music. And so I think those were things, those were people who really set my my trajectory going forward as an artist activist, even though I think in, mainline white, predominantly white churches, that's, work I wouldn't necessarily stand in the pulpit and talk about in quite the same way. But it is a question of who we are as people. How do we live together? How do we practice our values in the ways in which we do ordinary things like sing together? And then, what is the community that we're creating um, out of those gatherings?
Mm.
Yeah, I've been so moved by seeing videos online. We live in this age where we literally watch wars happening from our phones. But I've been so moved whenever I see people still playing music together, singing together, creating together in these war-torn places where that just in the middle of rubble, um, there is this will of our human spirit to continue creating together. And to me, that just it proves that music is not something that is frivolous or um, an afterthought or an accessory, but it's really something that we need as human beings.
Mm.
I'm so moved by that.
Absolutely. I think when we try to think what we're doing is unimportant in music,
Mhm.
you have to you only have to look to other people who are doing music as the key to survival,
Yeah.
and it's an essential human activity. So I think we participate in something that is truly deeply human as we
Yeah.
Yeah.
are part of music.
I remember having a real shift when the first time I heard Leonard Bernstein's quote. I think it's after Bobby Kennedy was shot, but he said, "Our answer to violence will be to make music
Yeah.
more
More
passionately, more
deeply.
deeply." Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was, it almost feels like a turning point for me, that like realizing, oh my gosh, that's this creating of music, of community, of beauty, all the things that come out of making music together.
Yeah.
That is an answer
And a
in a
calling.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So this is maybe shifting a little bit, but Maren, I've heard you talk about improvising. Um, I think it was I listened to you on the Holden Village podcast, I think, and I think that's maybe where I heard you mentioning um, working with a jazz trumpeter and uh, sort of trying to hone this craft of improvisation. And I'm curious now, as someone that finds themselves in ministry, um, what have you learned about yourself um, through the practicing the art of improvisation? And do you think is there anything to be learned about the life of faith from improvising?
Oh man, for a long time. Yeah, I came to improvisation pretty late. I played cello growing up, so it wasn't something that I was able to do as a part of my, like, school curriculum. I decided to take jazz trumpet, or I took jazz improv from a trumpet player when I was in college, and actually in all of my music classes, it was the only B I ever received. Um, it was just such, like, a hard place to start, and
Yeah.
from a musician who just really didn't understand my instrument. But I started playing with worship bands is actually where I started kind of seriously improvising, and, that was a great place to start because it's really simple chord progressions in really simple keys, so it was a good kind of place to just try stuff and
Yeah.
where the failures were pretty easy to correct. From there, I started to play with indie rock bands, and it didn't start out as improvisational as it was more kind of like being able to compose for the first time and to play my compositions in public. But then that ramped up, and I started to do that much more seriously, and it was more like a chamber rock thing that I was a part of. So as that got going, then, I started to be in more circumstances where I was doing more improvisatory playing. And eventually, when I was in Helena, especially, started playing with my friend Kate, and we do a lot of gigs that are like these long 3-hour gigs. So a ton of opportunity to just kind of step into improvisation. And I think what I've learned from that experience is you really have to kind of be in a place, and I don't really have practices that get me there, faithfully, but where you kind of get out of your ego, you're not really in a thinking brain anymore. It's like there's an analytical side to it, but where you disconnect from the critic. And to be in the space where you're in total dialogue and total freedom with another person, and especially when you don't really care where things go. Like Kate and I'll just do these fun riffs where it can just spiral off into these directions where, we're doing these weird, riffing on kind of like polyrhythms, or we'll pull some hymn into this place where it's like almost Jimi Hendrix like, and we don't know where it's gonna go. It just it sort of takes us and carries us somewhere that is unexpected. And I think that that is probably the best metaphor I can think of for my spirituality in its best place, is where does the spirit carry me that I could never have really come up with if I'd sat down and really tried to like reason my way through a problem. Improvisation in that way, and I've had other experiences, not maybe as significant as playing with my friend Kate, but where that improvisatory ethos has been a part of my music, but it became part of my composition practice too, where I sit down to compose, and the best compositions that come out of it, I'm not really thinking about what I'm doing. It's like first idea, best idea, just get it on the page and let's just see what happens. And it's such a delightful process to just see what's inside of you that you would never have reasoned through.
Yeah, I love that. It made me think of, um, I've heard the author Anne Lamott talk about the writing process, and she talks about you just have to put things down on the page, even if you're going to throw away those first 5 days, and then before you land on, oh, this is what it's supposed to be. But it's in that exploring, just doing it, and
Right.
exploring is where you find the art that you're looking for.
I think there's probably some life lessons in that practice of just starting and giving yourself permission to not be perfect right away, and to not have what you're doing be the final product, but you have to start.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's such a pleasurable process too. It's so fun to surrender to the joy of that, whether you're alone or with somebody else. Just like, who knows what's gonna happen? Here we go.
Well, I wish you were here in person, and we could try some of this out in person, but maybe in the future someday.
Yeah. Um, Maren, can you share a little bit? I've already mentioned Holden Village and hearing you on their podcast, and I know that you have some deep connections there with that um, community. You've done some composing for them. Can you share with our listeners who might not know what or where Holden Village is? Can you share a little bit about that place, but also your connection there and the work that you've done with them?
Yeah, Holden Village is just wonderful. It's a Lutheran retreat center. It's the most remote, continuously occupied place in the continental United States. So you have to go to Chelan, Washington, and then take a boat for about 2 hours, and then take a bus for about another hour to get to the village, and so by the time you even get there, it's like you've been on a journey, on a pilgrimage to the middle of nowhere. But once you arrive, it's this old mining village that, after the mine closed down, the village was gifted to the ELCA for a retreat center, and so it's a completely built out town. It's like a bizarre experience to go that deeply into the mountains and then be surrounded by like massive homes and a bowling alley and a sauna and a hot tub and like and espresso. So it's this really really place, but they run it's a camp and conference center, but they run really intergenerational programs, and have been in operation for like 50 years, where they do all kinds of things around music and religion and art and really deep theological practices. And so it's been just a place that I think every time I go there cracks me open in some unexpected way. And I got involved there initially. I'd heard of Holden Village for years and years. I worked at a Lutheran church in Seattle for 6 years when I was in grad school, so I'd heard about it then. But ended up going there for the first time 5 years ago because a longtime mentor of mine, Stacy Kitahara, was one of the executive directors. So I wanted to reconnect with Stacy, and so went as a musician first in like mid COVID. So we were doing all of our worship outside, but encountered some of the work that was being done to do new liturgical writing there, and they've always kind of had a a community that was nurturing new liturgical writing, but a group of villagers at the time were working toward a new liturgy. And I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And I kind of serendipitously got an ask to work on some scholarship at the same time. And I thought, well, this is a great project. So I followed them as they did this work to kind of write a new liturgy for Holden Village to take the place in a way of the longtime Holden Evening Prayer that was written in 1986 by
Yeah.
Marty Haugen. But this was sort of a way to expand the Vespers language and the ideology of the liturgy to incorporate less binarian language around light and dark, and to focus on just a really poetic way of interpreting the text. So that was a fun, cool project to think about kind of tradition and new practices, but then also how in a community that's sort of that tied to a liturgy, how do you decenter something that's so important to a
Yeah.
community? So that there was a lot of great stuff that came up in that. And then sort of randomly from the first year that I was there, I connected with the liturgy of a guy named John Hermanson, who I guess I had met before through my friend Kate and Helena, but didn't really know much about. Then I found out that Johnny had moved from Minnesota back to Montana about the time that I started at Hope Lutheran. And so I contacted him. He was a part of a duo called Story Hill. Contacted him, was like, hey, you want to play at the church? And he was like, ah, sure. So he started playing here just kind of as like a special musician off and on. And he'd grown up at Hope Lutheran. But as I got to know him, he is just a remarkable person and remarkable liturgical writer. He has done all kinds of stuff writing for commercial music, writing for MTV, had a studio for a long time, is just a really prolific artist. And so I got to know his liturgical music really well inside and out. And his music was just kind of shards of paper laying around. And so we decided to do this little residency project to put it all together into a songbook. And in the process of doing that, Holden Village reached out and was like, hey, Johnny had written this liturgy up there in 2017. Do you want to bring that back as the centerpiece of the summer? And so we, of course, jumped at that opportunity to do a new rearrangement of his Isaiah liturgy, which is a really beautiful piece that's focused on justice and peace and renewal. And so I did the transcriptions and arranging, and then we got to reintroduce that back to Holden Village last summer, and they did it every week for the whole summer. So that was
Wow.
awesome.
Nice. That I latched onto something you said there about decentralizing a piece of liturgy that was so a part of the DNA of that community. What did you learn about that? I'm just thinking that so many congregations among church musicians, at least, and I think worship leaders, pastors, it's often a conversation. Well, how do you best introduce something new to your congregation? How do you go about that? So I'm curious to know what you learned in that process about how, or knowing when is the right time to introduce something new, or I don't know what thoughts you might have around that.
Yeah. Is it, I mean, something that probably every church musician deals with in pretty intense ways. And I think at Holden Village, the key thing about something like Holden Evening Prayer is that it was pushing boundaries and doing something new when it was written. And so it's good to remember that everything old was once new, and that we still have a responsibility to continue exploring what God is doing, this sort of spirituality improvisation of God in the world. And so, you don't want to throw the entire tradition, on the junk heap. That's not what's being done. But we have a need to keep the kind of aperture expanding. And I think that that's really what was being done at Holden Village. A key thing was that the village started to think about some of the language in Holden Evening Prayer and started to change words and, think about hierarchy, think about light and dark, and do some of that work. And finally, they reached out to Marty Haugen. They were like, hey, how about a new edition? And he was like, no, this is a thing that was created at this specific time with this specific group of people.
Sure.
If it's outdated, that's fine.
Sure.
Write something new.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it was actually from Haugen that initiation happened. So it was helpful to like have a conversation and be in the difficult conversations, both as a community, to be thinking like, what are our values now? How are these things representative of our values, or how are they not serving us anymore? And then to even go to the originator of the tradition and for him to be like, what are you doing? Just you're writing.
What a gift that his ego wasn't wrapped up in that. I mean, that's
Oh my gosh.
so
I
beautiful.
talked to him too, and he's just such a wonderful person. Yeah.
Yeah, in a different interview, we talked a lot about language and how language, the language that we use in worship is really so important, and that we have examples of how over time our language, of course, evolves and changes, and there's a shift in lots of churches to change our language to become more inclusive. And I think that's such a beautiful thing. And there are certain historical practices that maybe use language that we wouldn't use today, but they've been around for centuries. And so finding that line and that balance of what can we change and what can we use with the understanding that this was written in a specific time and place, I think is something probably lots of churches are grappling with.
Yeah, and I think what I really love about the Holden Village example is that they are in the conversation intentionally about what this language is, what it means for us, and how it is we want to be as people moving forward. Whereas I think, it's just harder to have those conversations in a community where the people are only really together once a week and to wrestle with some of those questions. So I think that the biggest lesson coming out of it, to me, is we need to continue those conversations about what this is and what we're doing here.
Yeah. Okay, one more question about Holden Village, and then we want to talk more about your scholarship and research. I'm actually going to be in Lake Chelan this summer, and is Holden Village something that people could just hop over to? I might tell my husband I'm going to take a quick 2-hour boat ride and a quick 1-hour bus ride and check this place out. Is that a thing?
Well, there's not a couple things. The first is that they were hammered by a wildfire about 10 years ago, and then this past couple weeks, actually, they experienced such intense flooding that the village had to be evacuated for the first time since its founding. I mean, this is such a big deal. And they just have reintroduced a few people back to the village to just be caretakers there, but they're flying people in and out right now.
Okay.
So that's huge. But let's hope that the village will be open by May, which is the projected timeline. Ins and outs to the village are like every couple days. So if you're able to get there, I'm not sure how well you're going to be able to get out.
Got it. Okay. Well, I'll add it to my list of maybe one day being able to visit.
Yeah, it's totally worth it. And it's worth it to spend the time there.
Amazing. So I wanted to shift the conversation to talk a little bit more about some of your research. I watched your TEDx talk, and I've read your upcoming article for Call to Worship. At the time of this recording, it's upcoming. It may be published by the time this episode comes out. And you discuss your research in presentational versus participatory music. And my first question is a little bit about your research methods. You talk about some of the places where you've been, where you've experienced participatory music, and you talk about your experience in Mexico. This was in your TED Talk where, is it son jarocho? Is that how you say this word? Yes?
Yeah, son jarocho.
So I want to know about all of those experiences, or maybe some memorable experiences where you experienced real participatory music. And that one in particular interested me because you said you're just handed an instrument and shown how to play a few chords, and then you're off to the races. What was that like, and how did you come to find this?
Well, speaking of the artivistas who are doing a lot of work around identity and keeping these traditions going, and Marta Gonzalez and Quetzal Flores are two musicians who I encountered in Seattle because they Marta was pursuing her PhD, but they are part of a band called Quetzal, and I would highly recommend looking up their music. And then Marta is also a scholar of gender studies and teaches in the Los Angeles area. But really incredible people who are so articulate about what it is they're doing and why. But it just happened that they, had started at the University of Washington around the time that that Marta started at the University of Washington around the time that I moved to Seattle. And they got a community together of predominantly people who have Mexican heritage, but not exclusively, to connect once a week and do this practice called son jarocho. The gatherings are called fandangos, but there are a couple of key components to this practice. One is that there is a little platform made out of wood that dancers dance on, and they're sort of a kind of a tap dance style thing that you do in cowboy boots or boots with hard heels. So it's audible, it's percussive. And then a series of instruments called jarranas and requintos, and then some percussion that goes with that too. And so the practice, and then there's singing, and there's a lot of call and response in the singing. So when you get together to do this, the purpose of this, even though like bands like Quetzal and there are others do this as performance, but the intended practice is participatory. So when you come together to do this style of music, there's not an audience that's sitting and watching, but everybody's a part of it. And so you gather around the platform, and there's usually a set of musicians who know the practice really well, but anyone can participate. So you can show up and you can start singing and playing from the very beginning. But you gather around the platform, and dancers come up, and there are some very simple steps that you can start with to learn how to do this. And singers call out songs, and there's a lot of just kind of call and echo that you can do in the style. But the objective is just to get the max number of people involved as possible. One song that's really, really famous that comes out of the Son Jarocho tradition is La Bamba. And so that's actually a traditional song that we did almost every week that I was there anyway to do this practice. But I participated with that community weekly for probably about a year, and then was kind of in and out of the community after that. But really incredible experience, all in Spanish, and I have like decent but not great Spanish, but it was fun to just sort of hang around the perimeter and be a part of it.
Well, that's cool.
That's incredible, and it feels like so much of where music making happens, it feels like there are people who make music and people who listen to music. They take in music. They're observers of music, and it feels like that's a place that is probably pretty impossible to not be pulled into the music making, which is really such a unique experience. That's
Yeah, and it was really like a hangout, so, like,
yeah.
everyone brought their kids. There was always, like, a gaggle of kids running around, like, making noise, like, people inside conversations. There was usually food. So it's like it's just sort of a party atmosphere, but instead of there being music for, like, to dance to that's recorded, you're actually making the music. So the the gathering is, they call it convivencia, like, coming together to do life together.
Mm.
Um and just joyful, fun.
Yeah.
And what a great place, sorry,
Okay.
to bring children up in, where their participation is encouraged and invited and welcomed, and that those kids grow up with the sense that music making is for everyone.
Yeah.
That is a really special thing.
That's what I was thinking, that
Yeah.
in American culture, it seems that communal music making, communal singing is not something other than singing happy birthday or maybe take me out to the ball game
Sure.
at a baseball game, we don't sing communally. And so often, at least in the congregations where I've worked, the number of people that say things like, "Oh, you don't want me to sing the hymns. I don't sound good. You don't want me to do that." And I'm always like, yes, I do. In one of his books, he says, congregational singing has nothing to do with sounding good.
Mm.
That's not the point of it. And I've always loved that. I always quote that to people when they say,
Yeah.
you don't want me to sing. But what a gift that community is to gather people in a way that, nope, this is for everyone.
Yeah, and I think that so as church musicians, we all like to think that we are being that our ministry is just maximally participatory in nature at all times. Like we like to think, well, the congregation is invited to sing, the organ is playing or the band is playing, and we have people stand. And the goal is for, we hope that people are singing. We want people to maybe like sway and feel the music deeply. But like Jeremy said, the reality is not everybody feels empowered to participate musically. And I don't think it's unique to American culture, but it certainly is prevalent here. What are some ideas that churches do you have any practices that you're using at your church, or do you have any thoughts on how we can invite participatory music to happen in our churches?
Yeah, I mean, participatory music, churches are one of the last holdouts of
Mm,
places where people are welcome to participate, where participation is expected. Um, and where I think like the vast majority of people, if not everybody, understands that it's not about sounding good. This maybe will go on some YouTube channel, but
mm,
it's a fleeting moment that we can kind of throw into the ether. But I think that there are some really key things. And as a leader, I've been probably changing how I think about this in the past few years. But the biggest thing as a leader that I think about is I want to introduce songs to my congregation that I love,
mm.
and that I just can I get 100% of a buy-in from myself to sing, and I'm usually the song leader in our congregation. So, modeling the joy of singing is one of my goals, and particularly, I'm an okay singer. I mean, other people would say otherwise, but I'm an okay singer, and I just really have stayed in choral music, have stayed in singing because I find it to be just so deeply pleasurable. I just love to sing, and I love to sing with
Yeah.
others. And so to step up to the microphone with that key objective, that I am there to make sure they know how the song goes, to make sure that there's sort of a guiding line that people can kind of connect to. But as soon as I can tell they know the song, like we did a hymn sing on Sunday and we were singing all these traditional carols, I just had a moment of like, I don't need to be at this microphone. Like they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So the experience of being able to just kind of like listen for full participation and to start to back off the mic. Um, but, I think about that too with all of the congregational songs we do, and we do a lot of new music, probably. And I probably don't do as much repetition as I should around it. But, like, we have John Hermanson is now a part of our congregation
Wow.
and part of our staff. And so we do a ton of his original stuff. So it's like not only new music, but it's like new music nobody's ever sung before. And try to encourage a lot of creativity. And so what does it mean to introduce things that you just absolutely love, and then to do them in ways that people also feel compelled to step up and step into singing because of that love?
Yeah. That's really beautiful. It makes me think of I did some training for early childhood music teaching, and one of the things that my instructor was saying is that if you are singing with children, and this particular one was um, like a mommy and me type class, or caregiver and child type class, so it's something that they're doing together. And what my instructor told me was that if you sing in your best, most operatic voice, it makes people feel like they're not good enough, and that it sort of actually discourages their participation. And so, um, your voice is beautiful, by the way. I've heard you sing. But I also, there is a way of singing that is inviting, and as organist, some of my favorite moments actually is when I can tell that the congregation is singing really well, and then I just stop playing and let their voices carry
Mm.
through. And yeah, inviting and empowering people to sing and to sing together is such a powerful,
Mhm.
powerful thing. So,
Yeah, the other practice that I've been in that reminds me of is music that makes community. My dear friend Paul Vasile has been the executive director of that for years, but stepped aside a bit ago. But I went to one of their events in the Bay Area when I was living there, and it was just an utterly transformative experience for me. The people who led Music That Makes Community primarily were not very well trained musicians. They were people who just had a love for the practice. It's so accessible. The songs that are part of the repertoire, there's a great resource. If you just Google Music That Makes Community, their website has tons of songs and resources. Um, but it's really about rote teaching, oral learning, short songs that start with just things that are just melodies that you're repeating back, but that can blossom then into these really complex rounds and part songs and things like that. And so I witnessed that and then just became obsessed with it and started to do a lot more community music teaching. But that is my very favorite way of sort of doing congregational music, even though it's not a huge part of my practice in my job here. But at Holden Village in particular, teaching people totally by rote, totally paperlessly, to do things I think oftentimes that are well beyond their expectations of what they're gonna be capable of. And then also watching a group as it moves, like in an hour, I can do a full hour of teaching or more without any words, without any instruction, um, where people step into the process of really paying attention, listening, attuning, moving, and just watching the kind of transformation of a community um, around music is one of the most, like, magical experiences of my life.
Mm.
I love that you said that, what you said about giving as little instruction as possible. I think sometimes church musicians, we feel the need to explain and over-explain way too much, and I think it often gets in the way of the flow of worship, and it gets in the way of, I think it sometimes sort of stifles the moving of the spirit of what's happening to then say, "Okay, now we're going to stand, and now we're going to turn to" if it's in the bulletin or if you're modeling and you're singing to them and then you raise your hands, they will know to sing back to you. And it takes a little bit of practice and trust, but I think it's really worthwhile to try to examine how much we're talking and giving instruction, and is it all necessary?
Yeah.
And there's something wonderful too about that modality puts people kind of in this weird, like, this is so new for me.
Mm.
So I'm going to be willing to make mistakes, and I make mistakes too. It's like we're all kind of there together to just have a playful experience.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of pivot point is like there's the serious work of music. And I can speak at length about why this is serious work.
Hmm.
But it's also extremely playful and opens us up into sort of this childlike place, this beginner's mind, where we can step into being willing to be foolish, being willing to be wrong, and to have like levity with that. There's nothing all that important. I mean, I was the symphonic choir director the last couple of years as an interim for Bozeman Symphony, and we were going into our performance week of Carmina Burana, and I just had this moment. I was so nervous. It was so stressful of like, this is so silly. I mean, I raise my hands and people open their mouths and make sound. And like, what a weird thing that I get to do with my life. And it just like all the nervousness kind of was able to fall out the bottom of it to realize this nobody's gonna die today if I don't wave my hands correctly. Like it's serious work, but it's also really dumb. It's really stupid in a beautiful way.
Yeah. It also is interesting to me that, like, you're the name of the music that makes community, um that phrase is there, makes community. And I know I found, even whether it's I've used some of their resources, and suddenly, I mean, not that there are hymns in our hymnal that are so meaningful and important to me, and I wouldn't ever suggest that we should get rid of those and stop singing them. But even though we're making music communally, it's easy for me to be there with my hymnal and just to be
Mm.
almost doing this solitary thing where my head is in the book. But when I've used those resources before, suddenly as a leader, it's different than being at the organ for sure. I'm looking and making eye contact with you. People are looking back at me, people are looking at each other, and there's something that just inherently happens where we're together. Or even to your example of, symphony. I used to sing in the symphony chorus in Columbus, Ohio, and one year we did Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Nothing that's groundbreaking. Lots of folks are doing that, but the chorus decided that we wanted to do it from memory, and that sticks inside of me as such a meaningful music making experience because I wasn't in the score suddenly. And obviously a congregation isn't going to do that on Sunday morning, but still that was such a different experience to have the music internalized and then just be looking at the audience, looking at the conductor, looking at each other. It just changed the way I experienced that music. So I think it's meaningful, and that is specific. That resource you're talking about is specifically called music that makes community.
Maren, in your TED Talk, you said a line that made me I laughed out loud because I knew exactly what you meant. You said, "There's a part of me that kind of hates music." I don't know if I'm quoting that exactly directly, but I knew what you meant by that. There's a part of me that's like, there's a lot of fear that surrounds performing, and especially when you're performing a masterwork, that there's such precedence of how it should go, that there sometimes can be a little part of us as musicians that's like, we're so riddled with fear of something going wrong that we almost aren't enjoying music at all. And it's really what has drawn me more towards this communal act of worship and working less as a solo concert pianist and more just being together and making music together. So I think is sort of what your research is much about.
Yeah, and I think just on a personal level, I think I didn't realize how much I loved the Western tradition, and especially, like, kind of the contemporary music side of that, the really boundary pushing side, until I was able to step into these places where, you know, some of the best musicians I've ever worked with, bar none, have no musical training and, like, don't even know what notes they're playing. But such incredible writers. They're capable of doing things that your counterpoint trained music theorist could never do because they're not thinking like that. And so I think by decentering the Western tradition, I've come to love it more. Just to say, like, this is one of many ways to make music, and I love to make music. So
Fabulous.
I'm curious just to dig a little bit deeper about this dichotomy between presentational and participatory forms of worship. Um, in thinking about your upcoming article that we've referenced in Call to Worship, and you talk about that. And I hear you talking about the emphasis on expertise and skill that's a part of presentational worship. And for me, that immediately leads me to imagine it as a very ego-based form of worship in a way. And yeah, I read once, I don't remember where I read this, but that sometimes we need to pray and sometimes we need to be prayed for or prayed over. And I've always extended that to music, that sometimes I need to sing and sometimes I need to be sung to. So I'm curious, um, do you find that there's a both and there, that both are important? Like, are there moments when, you need to hear someone else sing when you're in a place of sorrow or pain, or that you don't have the words, but you need the words of someone else's prayer? I don't know. How does that strike you? Does that?
oh, absolutely. I mean, I think artistic practices and spirituality and being alive are really all acts of breathing. You need to take something in, and you need to let something out. That those both must happen in order for us to be,
Yeah.
I think, attuned and regulated even, much less to have the capacity for creativity. But, The Artist's Way, Julia Cameron's wonderful book,
Yeah.
it has a lot of practices in it that are about that. What are you breathing in?
Mm.
And that their 2 critical practices are morning pages, which is just a what are you letting out? Just let out
Right.
the worst of you, write every morning. And then there's the artist state, which is where you take yourself to go see and experience things. And that's the breathing in. I mean, that's how you just see what other people are kind of expelling into the world. And I think whether it's being prayed for or listening to, I mean, I have wonderful colleagues and I have wonderful musicians in my community. And one of the greatest gifts is just listening to them, not participating. Um, so that's the breathing in. And I think it's essential to
Yeah.
our community.
So I read your article that you wrote for the Yale Journal of Music and Religion, and I'm jumping topics a little bit, if that's okay. Um, it sort of delighted me to think about how Christian music from the 90s and 2000s has now been studied in an academic way. This is like music that teenage Sarah was listening to, and I thought was so punk rock and cool that Christians were making music like the music that we were hearing from Tooth and Nail Records, and that it was like hardcore and awesome. And it just sort of delighted me that people are studying this. And it just reminded me too that music really never happens in a vacuum, right? Music is always a reflection of society, and that Christian music was, of course, being influenced by the other secular music that was happening, the grunge movement, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and then I think I listened to every band that sounded like Nirvana and Pearl Jam, but were Christian because of, of where I grew up and how I grew up in all of my youth group Christian bands. Uh, what were some of your findings? Can you just talk a little bit about? I know you wrote your dissertation on some of this topic in the Mars Hill Church. What were some of your findings about what distinguished that kind of style? And I'm sure you can talk for a long time about this, but I think I'm just finding it very interesting about yeah, masculinity, vowel placements, and instrumentation and timbre.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, this is a fun article to write. Yeah, great question. You're right, I could talk forever on it, so I'll try to keep it short. But, yeah, I grew up too in the kinda 90s, 2000s. It's almost like generic branding where they're like, "If you like Dove soap, you'll love blah, blah," like, that's all like the Christian music
Yeah.
industry, like, Pearl Jam, you'll love blah, blah. Um, so
The
the
if I can
I
interject, the Christian bookstore I went to as a kid growing up literally did say that, in, like, their magazines. They're like, "If you like, Beyoncé, you might like, whoever." And it literally did say that, which is very funny. The
so it was
algorithm,
like
before the
it was
algorithm.
fun to kinda step into this because, I had a friend who was interning at Tooth and Nail when I was in college, so I had a lot of friends kind of around who were interested in that scene,
Yeah.
but it wasn't necessarily as much my thing. I didn't get super into those bands. I was more just listening to the straight up indie rock, like, if you like so and so. Um, but as I got into this research project, the thing that kind of set me off and just made me decide to do this as my dissertation project was I was taking this awesome class called Megachurches from James Wellman,
Amazing.
who's a megachurch scholar. And for that class, I decided to go to Mars Hill and just kind of check it out, thinking, this is going to be a normal evangelical worship experience. And, I would be sort of just like critical of the whole thing. But I walked in and was like blasted with this incredible version of Praise the Lord Who Reigns Above. and it had like this great trumpet arrangement. It was just like this moment of like, oh my gosh, like this is my music, was my reaction to it. And I was playing in a couple of indie rock bands at the time in Seattle. Like I didn't even know that I played with people who were playing at Mars Hill at the time. So it was like literally it was my music. And my favorite artist was Sufjan Stevens. Turns out his drummer was playing at the church. I mean, it's just like this was a total interweaving with the indie rock scene and the punk and grunge scene in Seattle. But like by this point in time, this was indie rock. The guitarist from the Shins was playing at Mars Hill. And so like I think that was just a wake-up call of like, this isn't what I was expecting this to be. It was this very conservative church that was at the time like constantly in the news because of some terrible thing that the pastor had said, and yet the music was really on point to the scene, and the scene as I had experienced it was like pretty progressive, so it seemed immediately like a paradox. And as I got to know what was up with Mars Hill, it turned out that that was like part of the foundation of how they had become popular. They as a church were focused around artists and musicians, and at first kind of were part of the emerging church thing where they were moving from venue to venue and setting up all their candles, and then this like rock band would come and play. But one of the guys that started playing there early on, Jeff Betger, was young at the time, was playing in the punk scene, and he just asked if he could start organizing shows. And so the church's first venue that they had purchased was this little theater in the U District of Seattle. And so he started organizing just random shows throughout the week. And it became Seattle's like preeminent all ages, but punk, grunge, and indie rock venue. And like every major band, which would be like major, minor band from that time, played there. And even my like really dear friend who was in this anarchist punk band in Olympia, he like went to shows there. So people didn't know was a part of the church. So that became kind of how this whole thing spun into this place where you see this incredible music culture existing alongside this extremely reactionary religious movement. And they were entwined, but they were also distinct. And so you had people who were a part of the music who would not really co-sign the theological side of it, but that's because that sort of grew over time.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, it does feel like a paradox when I think of Seattle. It's not the place where I would imagine that a church with theology like Mars Hill would thrive and grow. And yeah, that is really fascinating how music.
Yeah, and the venue, interestingly, was called The Paradox. So they knew.
How funny. Oh, that is so interesting. And do I remember that you were, not to make this the Mark Driscoll Mars Hill podcast, because there is already a really fascinating podcast, The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. But do I remember that were you there on his last Sunday? Did I hear you
I
say that? Oh my gosh.
It was the one and only time I saw him in person, was the last Sunday he preached.
Wow.
Wow.
That's really fascinating. Okay, I would love to talk to you more about that another time. I'll give you my number after so we can keep chatting about it.
So I'm wondering if you can tell us about some of your upcoming work. You already mentioned Sufjan Stevens. Blah. I have to ask this because he's my husband's absolute favorite, so he'd be mad if I didn't ask. Can you tell us anything about your upcoming co-edited book about him and metamodernism? And maybe even just to start that off, can you explain to our listeners, maybe in a nutshell, what metamodernism is for those that maybe don't know?
Yeah, I was invited into this book project before I knew what metamodernism was, so I've spent a lot of time learning about it. So within sort of the field of philosophy, this is a way of understanding kind of what has been emerging since postmodernism, and certainly a lot of different um, perspective ways of understanding the present age and maybe the immediate past age have risen up. But metamodernism was one of those postmodernisms proposed that I guess you could kind of understand as a Hegelian dialectic, although that's not really how it's understood.
Sorry, I have to
uh,
interrupt you. For our listeners, aka me, can you say more about what Hegelian analytic
oh
is?
yeah, I'm saying that.
Oh, okay,
Which
cool.
is like you had modernism, which was kind of the predominance of meta narratives and ways of understanding ultimate truth. So like Christianity, for example, but like, anything that has truth claims as a part of it. And then postmodernism, there are lots of probably reasons that postmodernism follows modernism, but is about the decentering of ultimate truth, about like
Hmm.
multiplicity and kind of the horizontality of all truth systems. And then metamodernism sort of navigates between those two poles and is proposing that there's sort of not really like a synthesis between them, but a pendulum swing that kind of goes from in multiple directions at all times. And so, like, Sufjan Stevens is a good example of this as a person who's a Christian artist, but is also really skeptical of Christianity and is kind of at once like proclaiming Christianity and decentering Christianity. But then there's all these other kind of moves artistically where you see these extremes that are being swung between. So, like with Sufjan Stevens, you've got the epic, and then like he writes these massive orchestral pieces and these huge electronic things, and then the tiny where he pulls back to just like guitar and voice. Um, so all of this like way of navigating between like irony and honesty, like you don't always know where a person stands with metamodernism, and that it's one of the kind of core, I think, millennial, but like sort of 2010s um, ways of engaging the world. So this book project wanted to explore metamodernism in more detail with several metamodern scholars. Myself and then my colleague Josh Bussman, who invited me in, were invited in as music scholars. So that was sort of our point of connection. But it was a really great exploration. I've been a long time huge fan of Sufjan Stevens, but was really thinking about Sufjan and, for at least my piece of this, Sufjan and his identity as an artist and how he sort of exists in plain view, but is also completely obscured, and you don't ever really know who the real Sufjan Stevens is in his writing. And part of that was like his sexuality. He was always sort of this like, is he talking about God or is he talking about his gay lover? You never really knew.
Yeah.
Well, and then it was like, oh, both. He's talking about both. And so like all of these ways in which he uses poetics and he uses kind of the I pronoun to be one thing and not that thing at the same time. So that was sort of where I took the project. But it's a great collection of essays on all kinds of different issues and topics in that explore metamodernism through the lens of Sufjan Stevens.
Nice.
And that's coming out this year, right? When is that?
Yep. Forthcoming. I don't know
Okay.
when. You've been
Question
in
mark.
touch with our publisher. Sort of the wrapping up final details. So
Great.
it should be out soon.
I'm curious about that when you're describing it. There's the metamodernism and there's something that almost feels mystical about this, not leaning away from that idea of absolute truth. Something very mystic in this. I could be making this up, but I'm just curious. Do you see any connections then with maybe some of this isn't all brand new, but looking at like the ancient mystics in the church, do you see a connection there?
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a lot of discussion of that in the book, in fact. And there's a great metamodernism scholar, Linda Ciriello, who writes about metamodernism and mysticism and how they are interwoven in various ways in new religious movements. But like that experientialism is core to the metamodern experience, like like a phenomenology. I mean, it's one thing to believe something and it's one thing to experience something. And how do you kind of reconcile between those things? So,
Yeah.
mhm.
That's amazing. Well, we're appreciative of all the time that you've given us. We'll start to wrap up, but is there anything that we didn't discuss today that you were hoping to talk about, or is there anything that you want to plug that people can find you or find your work?
Yeah, thanks so much for this time. I feel like I've spun in a lot of different directions and
Well, we've
appreciate your
pulled you and pushed and pulled you in
Yeah,
many
there
directions
were
as
so
well.
many as we kind of dug into you and your work, it felt
Like,
like, "Oh my gosh, we could go, like, 17 different
sure,
ways. We wanna
sure.
know about all of these things."
well,
Yep.
thank you. Yeah, I think we're also looking ahead at a scholar practitioner project. I'm working with a couple of colleagues, Brian Hain from the Hymn Society, and then Marcel Struernagel, who is at Southern Methodist University. So the three of us are hoping to be working toward a deeper examination of what it is to be at that intersection of being a scholar and a practitioner. So hopefully that work will get going in the next couple of months. And then I also am a co-founder and program director of a new initiative at Hope Lutheran Church, which is our Center for the Arts. And we are attempting to do boundary pushing work in both traditional and new approaches to music and art and religious practices in all kinds of different ways. The most exciting part of that at the moment is that we are hosting artists in residence and are preparing to wrap up a pilot phase of that program and to start welcoming people who would like to apply as artists in residence to do 1 to 2 week stints on site with mentorship and support to test out their wildest ideas in the arts and religion in a lot of different directions. So that's the thing I'm most excited about right now.
That sounds amazing. Wow.
Incredible. And in beautiful Montana, no less. Wonderful.
Yeah, and glorious location.
So, Maren, we are asking all of our guests a question because many of our guests are obviously in ministry in some sort, connected to church ministry, and as people who are involved in, responsible for, in some way, pouring into others, the world is very heavy at times, and we're always ministering to other people. And sometimes, like you've mentioned today, you have to breathe in and breathe out. You have to fill your own cup or find ways to refresh your spirit. What are some ways? Where do you go? Is there anything that you're listening to or attending or reading that is refreshing your spirit and filling your cup?
Yes, yes, yes. I just love podcasts. I love listening to long form podcasts with scholars and artists and musicians, and so I mean I love Ezra Klein's podcast because of the kinds of people he brings on, but also looking back to Krista Tippett and a lot of other great interviewers who bring out the best in people. I do Zumba. It's sort of dorky, but I love to dance, and I'm not a good dancer, and I love to dance and be bad at it. And so I really love to go to Zumba a few times a week and just kind of like have my beginner's mind engaged. I do my morning pages almost every day, and I would highly recommend that practice. Just 3 pages of writing you never would want anybody, including you, to read again. Just kind of pouring out and seeing what's there. And then I think just investing in friendships has been so important to me. I'm a mom, and a spouse, and my kids are young, so there's so much about life day to day that is having a job and doing a role and making sure everybody's taken care of, and just to be somewhere where you show up to other people and get to learn from them and get to laugh and talk about weird things. There's something really valuable about having friendships, even at work, even at home, that just being attuned to another person is such a pleasurable thing. So
Yeah. It gets harder and harder as we get older and adults and give our time to kids and family, and it's get harder and harder to invest in yourself in that way.
Yeah, yeah.
and making music. I should also mention that. Perfect, Arissa. Yeah.
Well, Maren, we think you're so cool. We think you're so radical. And thank you so much for spending this time with us. Cellist, choral director, indie musician, scholar, ethnomusicologist. We really enjoyed getting to know you and hearing from your perspective.
Oh, both of you too. Thank you so much. This is such a delight.
Imagine a week of worship and music set in the beauty of the Blue Ridge Mountains.
The 2026 Worship and Music Conference takes place in Montreat, North Carolina, a place of reflection, creativity, and holy rest.
Come away to sing, learn, worship, and be renewed in body, mind, and spirit.
Join us June 21st through the 26th or June 28th through July 3rd.
Register today at presbymusic.org/conference. That was great.
Such a great episode.
What a great guest.
Oh my gosh. I just feel like we could have spent hours and hours with her.
Totally.
Yeah,
Totally. It makes me want to visit Montana for sure.
absolutely.
Well, if you all don't forget to pick up her work. She has some
Mhm.
upcoming work, a book coming out. She has an article in Call to Worship,
Yep.
which if you're not subscribed to Call to Worship, I'd really encourage you to subscribe. If you're a PAM member, the Presbyterian Association of Musicians, you're already subscribed to Call to Worship.
What
So
a gift.
yeah, check out her article there about presentational versus participatory music.
Mhm.
And it's asking the question, are we pulling in the maximum amount of
Mhm.
people that we can into worship?
Yeah, yeah. And even if you're not Presbyterian, you can still become a PAM member.
Absolutely.
The
Absolutely.
table is wide.
That's right. And all are welcome
Yeah.
at our table.
Yeah.
If you're in Montana, if you're around Bozeman, I would also encourage you to check out the Hope Lutherans Center for the Arts. It sounds like they're doing really amazing work there.
Yeah.
So,
Or it sounds like they were accepting applications to be an artist in
yes.
residence.
Yes, if
You know,
that's something that
that's
interests
something that
you,
interests you.
get that application in.
You can try anything out there, she said. So,
Amazing.
man, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, thanks for joining. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you next time.